Some girls are hidden because they are unwanted. Others are hidden because the wrong people would kill for their name. The portrait was small enough to disappear between the shelves. Most people would have missed it entirely. Serafina Vale almost did. She stood alone in the Duke's East Wing library with a silver dust cloth folded in her hands and the late afternoon rain whispering against the tall windows behind her. The room smelled of cedarwood, cold ashes, and old paper. It was not a room servants entered unless ordered directly. It was certainly not a room servants lingered in. Yet Serafina had stopped moving nearly a full minute ago. Because the child in the painting had her face. Not merely similar. Not close. Hers. The same pale eyes. The same dark blonde curls falling over one shoulder. The same faint scar above the left eyebrow that Serafina herself carried beneath the edge of her hairline. The portrait showed a girl no older than 5 sitting stiffly in a velvet chair with both hands folded in her lap, as though someone had instructed her not to move. She wore white silk trimmed with tiny pearls. The frame alone looked expensive enough to feed an entire village through winter. Serafina stared at it without breathing. A soft crack from the fireplace behind her made her flinch. The dust cloth slipped from her fingers and landed soundlessly against the Persian rug. Her pulse turned uneven. No one had ever painted her as a child. That much she knew. She had grown up in Thornmere Hollow in a stone cottage barely large enough for 2 beds and a cooking stove. Her mother had spent most winters coughing into linen cloths beside the fire while Serafina scrubbed laundry for neighboring farms before she was old enough to reach the wash table comfortably. Portraits belonged to wealthy children. To daughters with titles and estates and polished shoes lined beside nursery doors. Not girls who learned arithmetic from borrowed church books. Yet the child in the painting looked exactly like her. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the manor grounds. The windows trembled slightly inside their frames. Serafina stepped closer before she could stop herself. The portrait sat partially hidden behind a row of dark leather books. Someone had concealed it deliberately. Her fingers hesitated inches from the frame. Servants were dismissed for touching less valuable things than this. Sometimes worse than dismissed. Ravenshade Manor was a house built on silence. Questions rarely survived long there. Still, something stronger than caution pulled her forward. She touched the edge of the frame carefully. Cold metal pressed against her fingertips. Real. Heavy. Old. Her throat tightened. Slowly, she lifted the portrait from its hiding place. Dust clung to the back. The candlelight flickered across faded handwriting beneath the frame. 2 lines only. For Lucien. Protect her from them. Serafina stopped breathing entirely. Her eyes moved over the words again. Then again. Lucien. The Duke. Duke Lucien Ravenshade. The master of this house. A man who had never once spoken more than 3 words to her in 2 years of service. A man whose footsteps alone could silence an entire corridor. Protect her from them. Her hands began trembling before she realized it. Not violently. Just enough to shake the frame against her palms. Them. The word settled somewhere deep beneath her ribs. A memory stirred faintly at the edge of her mind. Firelight. A woman crying. Someone carrying her through smoke. Then nothing. The sound of a door opening downstairs shattered the silence. Serafina nearly dropped the portrait. Footsteps entered the east corridor. Slow. Measured. Male. Her stomach tightened instantly. She knew those footsteps. Every servant in Ravenshade Manor did. Duke Lucien never hurried. He moved through the house with the calm certainty of a man who expected the world to move aside for him. And usually it did. Serafina slid the portrait back between the shelves with shaking hands. Not perfectly. Crooked by perhaps half an inch. She reached to straighten it just as the library door opened behind her. You are late finishing the east wing. His voice was low and even. She turned immediately and lowered her gaze. Duke Lucien Ravenshade stood in the doorway dressed entirely in black riding clothes dampened slightly by rain. Water darkened the shoulders of his coat. His gloves remained on. He carried no riding crop today. Only a pair of folded letters in one hand. He looked exactly as he always did. Controlled. Severe. Untouched by hurry or emotion. Yet something about his eyes stopped her pulse cold. He already knew. Not about the crooked portrait. About her. The realization came suddenly and irrationally. Serafina lowered her eyes further before he could read the thought on her face. "I apologize, Your Grace," she said quietly. The storm delayed the upstairs work. Silence followed. Not ordinary silence. Heavy silence. The kind that pressed against skin. Lucien closed the library door behind him without looking away from her. The soft click echoed through the room. Serafina became painfully aware they were alone. The east wing always felt colder than the rest of the manor. Tonight it felt airless. "Did you find something interesting?" he asked. Her heartbeat stumbled once. "No, Your Grace." Another silence. He stepped farther into the room. Slow. Deliberate. Serafina kept her eyes lowered, though she could feel his attention moving over her with frightening precision. Not the attention of a man admiring a woman. Worse, the attention of a man measuring truths against lies. "Look at me." The command came softly. That somehow made it more dangerous. She obeyed. Lucien Ravenshade was 34 years old and carried authority the way other men carried weapons. Quietly. Efficiently. His dark hair remained damp from rain. His gray eyes revealed nothing easily. Most servants avoided looking directly at him for long. Serafina usually did the same. Tonight she could not seem to look away, because for one impossible second something shifted in his expression. Recognition. Not surprise. Not curiosity. Recognition. As though he had been expecting this moment for years. Then it vanished. "You should avoid the east shelves," he said calmly. "Some things here are not meant to be disturbed." Serafina felt cold spread slowly through her chest. He knew. Dear God. He knew she had seen it. But instead of anger, there was something else beneath his voice. Something quieter. Older. "Yes, Your Grace." Lucien studied her a moment longer. Rain struck harder against the windows now. Wind moved faintly through the chimney. Somewhere downstairs, a clock began striking 6. "Did your mother ever tell you where you came from?" The question hit her so unexpectedly she forgot to breathe again. Her fingers tightened against the dust cloth in her hands. "My mother was born in Thornmere Hollow," she answered carefully. "That was not what I asked." His gaze did not move. Serafina felt the room narrow around her. "No, Your Grace." Lucien nodded once, as though confirming something privately. Then his eyes drifted briefly toward the hidden portrait behind the shelves. Only for a second, but Serafina saw it. And suddenly the room no longer felt accidental. The hidden painting. The strange inscription. The Duke arriving precisely when she discovered it. None of it felt accidental anymore. Fear moved quietly through her stomach. Not panic. Something colder. The feeling of standing too close to the edge of a truth large enough to ruin her life. Lucien stepped aside from the doorway. "Finish your work downstairs," he said. "And Serafina." She froze at the sound of her name. He almost never used servants' names. "Yes, Your Grace." His expression remained unreadable. "Do not enter the east wing again unless I ask you to." She swallowed carefully. "Of course." Then she walked past him toward the corridor. Calm steps. Steady breathing. Eyes lowered exactly as a proper maid should behave. Only once she reached the staircase did she realize her entire body had gone cold. Because she understood one terrifying thing with absolute certainty now. Duke Lucien Ravenshade had not looked at her tonight like a servant who made a mistake. He had looked at her like someone who had finally found what he had been waiting for. By midnight, Serafina understood that fear could become a physical thing. It settled beneath the skin. It changed the way a person breathed. The servants' quarters sat high above the western kitchens beneath a slanted roof that groaned softly whenever the wind turned north. Usually the sounds comforted her. Tonight every creak felt deliberate. Polly Turner slept in the narrow bed beside hers with one arm hanging over the mattress and soft snores rising steadily through the darkness. Serafina lay awake staring at the ceiling beams while rain tapped against the tiny window above them. She had not stopped thinking about the portrait once. For Lucien. Protect her from them. The words repeated quietly inside her mind like footsteps through an empty corridor. At some point after midnight she sat up slowly and pressed both feet against the cold wooden floor. Her pulse remained restless. Sleep felt impossible. She crossed the room carefully so she would not wake Polly and poured water from the pitcher near the washstand into a small cup. Her hand shook slightly while lifting it. She lowered the cup untouched. Because another thought had begun troubling her now. Not the portrait itself. The Duke's expression. Recognition. Not confusion. Not shock. Recognition. As though he had expected her to find it eventually. The memory unsettled her more deeply than she wanted to admit. She moved toward the window and pushed the curtain aside an inch. Ravenshade Manor stretched beneath the storm like a sleeping fortress. Black stone walls. Narrow towers. Rows of darkened windows reflecting silver rain. Only one light still burned in the east wing. The Duke's study. Serafina stared at it for several seconds before forcing herself away from the glass. Servants did not think about dukes after midnight. Sensible servants certainly did not notice which windows remained lit. Yet she noticed. More than she should. More than was safe. The following morning arrived gray and bitterly cold. A layer of frost coated the lower gardens despite the rain from the night before. By 6:30 the kitchens were already crowded with movement. Copper pans clattered against hooks. Bread ovens glowed hot along the walls. Steam rose thickly from kettles while footmen carried trays toward the upper dining rooms. Serafina tied her apron silently and moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency. She preferred the mornings. Noise made invisibility easier. Mrs. Weatherby, the head housekeeper, stood near the pantry entrance reviewing inventory notes through tiny steel spectacles balanced low against her nose. She rarely raised her voice because she never needed to. One disappointed glance from Mrs. Weatherby could reduce a young servant to tears faster than shouting ever could. The east wing silver was polished improperly yesterday, she said without looking up. I expect it corrected before dinner. Yes, ma'am, Serafina answered immediately. Mrs. Weatherby finally lifted her eyes. Only briefly. Yet something strange flickered there before disappearing again. Not suspicion exactly. Caution. You will not be returning to the east wing today, the older woman added. His Grace has reassigned those duties. Serafina kept her face perfectly still. Of course. You will assist in the South Gallery instead. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Weatherby studied her 1 second longer than necessary. Then she returned to her papers. Serafina moved away calmly with a tray of breakfast linens balanced against her hip. Inside, her pulse had already begun climbing again. The reassignment was not random. Nothing inside Ravenshade Manor felt random anymore. By 8 o'clock she was polishing brass fixtures in the South Gallery, while winter light spilled pale and weak through the tall windows overlooking the frozen rose garden. The gallery walls displayed generations of Ravenshade portraits in heavy gilt frames. Dukes, countesses, officers in military coats, women draped in pearls and dark silk. Their painted eyes followed servants constantly. Serafina hated cleaning this corridor. The portraits made silence feel crowded. You missed a spot. She nearly dropped the polishing cloth. The voice came from behind her. Male. Calm. Familiar. Serafina turned immediately. Nathaniel Graves stood near the doorway holding a ledger beneath one arm. He served as the Duke's private secretary and managed nearly every estate matter outside London. At 38 he carried the composed exhaustion of a man who rarely slept enough and trusted almost no one. His sandy blonde hair had begun graying early near the temples. Unlike most aristocratic staff, Nathaniel spoke to servants politely, which somehow made him more difficult to read. Serafina lowered her eyes respectfully. Thank you, sir. Nathaniel glanced toward the portrait she had been cleaning. The fourth Duke of Ravenshade stared down from the wall with severe gray eyes remarkably similar to Lucien's. You are Serafina Vale. It was not a question. Her stomach tightened faintly. Yes, sir. You have worked here nearly 2 years. Yes. Nathaniel nodded once as though confirming information privately. Then his gaze moved toward her hands. You hold polishing cloths like writing paper. The statement caught her off guard enough that she looked up before she could stop herself. Nathaniel noticed immediately. His expression did not change. Most servants grip with the full palm, he continued mildly. You use your fingers. Like someone taught to preserve delicate pages. Serafina forced herself to answer evenly. My mother taught reading when I was young. Interesting. He said nothing else after that. Only studied her another quiet second before closing the ledger beneath his arm. His Grace dislikes delays. The gallery should be completed before luncheon. Then he walked away. Serafina remained completely still until his footsteps disappeared around the corner. Her hands had gone cold again. He had not sounded curious. He had sounded observant. Like the Duke. That frightened her most. Because she was beginning to understand something dangerous about Ravenshade Manor. The people inside it noticed far more than they revealed. The day passed slowly after that. Too slowly. Every corridor felt sharper somehow. Every glance lingered too long. Even ordinary sounds unsettled her now. A closing door. Whispered conversation. Footsteps outside empty rooms. Near 4 in the afternoon, Serafina carried fresh towels toward the western guest chambers when she heard voices drifting from the drawing room ahead. One voice belonged to Lady Agatha Pembroke, the Duke's aunt. The other belonged to Lucian himself. Serafina slowed instinctively before stopping beside the partially closed door. "You cannot keep delaying this forever," Lady Agatha said quietly. "London is already asking questions." "London always asks questions." Lucian sounded calm as ever. "That is not an answer." A pause followed. Serafina should have walked away immediately. Instead, she remained frozen beside the doorway with the towels held tightly against her chest. "She remembers nothing yet," Lucian said at last. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Silence followed inside the room. Then Lady Agatha spoke more softly than before. "And if she does? Then we proceed carefully." Serafina stopped breathing entirely. She backed away from the doorway before either voice could continue. One careful step. Then another. Her heartbeat pounded violently now beneath her ribs. She turned the corner too quickly and collided directly into someone crossing the opposite corridor. Warm hands caught her arms before she lost balance entirely. "Careful." Serafina looked up instantly. Lucian Ravenshade stood inches away from her. The towel slipped from her grasp and scattered across the floor. Neither of them moved immediately. His hands remained around her arms. Steady. Warm even through her sleeves. Too close. Much too close. Serafina could smell rain again on his coat despite the clear weather outside now. Cedarwood too. And something sharper beneath it she could not name. Lucian looked down at her with the same unreadable stillness that unsettled her more every hour. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she whispered. "I was not watching where I walked." He did not release her immediately. "No," he said quietly. "You were listening." Fear moved through her so fast she felt it physically. His gaze held hers another second before finally dropping toward the fallen towels scattered across the carpet. Then he let go. Serafina bent instantly to gather them with trembling hands. Lucian crouched beside her before she could stop him. A duke kneeling on the floor beside a maid should have looked absurd. Somehow it did not. He lifted one towel slowly. Their hands brushed when he passed it back to her. "You frighten easily around me lately," he observed. She swallowed carefully. "I do not wish to disappoint you, Your Grace." Interesting answer. His eyes remained fixed on her face. Most servants would say they fear punishment. Serafina lowered her gaze quickly. "Should I?" A silence followed. Quiet. Dangerous. Lucian stood first and offered the final towel back to her. "No," he said. "Not from me." Then he walked away down the corridor without another word. Serafina remained kneeling on the carpet several seconds after he disappeared. Because she understood something now that frightened her far more than the portrait itself. The Duke was not deciding whether he recognized her anymore. He was deciding when to tell her why. The snow arrived 3 days later. It covered Ravenshade Manor in a silence so complete that even the servants lowered their voices instinctively while moving through the halls. By dawn, the gardens had vanished beneath nearly 6 inches of white. The frozen fountains looked like marble ghosts rising from the courtyards. Serafina stood near the laundry room window before sunrise watching stable boys struggle through drifts beside the carriage house. Usually winter mornings inside the manor followed strict patterns. Fires lit at 5. Breakfast trays prepared at 6. Corridors polished before the family descended by 8. Predictable routines comforted her. Predictable routines allowed invisible people to survive. But nothing inside Ravenshade Manor felt predictable anymore. Not after the portrait. Not after overhearing Lady Agatha. Not after the Duke looked at her as though he already knew every secret she carried without understanding any of them herself. "You are burning the towels." Polly's voice startled her from behind. Serafina looked down immediately. The pressing iron in her hand had rested too long against folded linen. Heat darkened one corner faintly. "Sorry." Polly laughed softly while taking the iron from her. "You have not been yourself all week." Serafina forced a small smile. "I am tired." "No. Tired is different." Polly lowered her voice conspiratorially while glancing toward the open laundry doorway. "Everyone says His Grace notices you lately." Serafina nearly dropped the stack of towels she was folding. "That is ridiculous." "Is it?" Polly grinned. "Nathaniel Graves asked your name yesterday." "Mr. Graves asks everyone's name." "Not twice." Serafina looked away immediately. The warmth from the pressing stove suddenly felt suffocating. Polly continued folding linens beside her with the casual cruelty of someone enjoying harmless gossip. "Cook says the Duke spoke to you in the corridor." "The Duke speaks to servants constantly." Polly snorted softly. "No. The Duke gives orders constantly." "That is different." Serafina said nothing after that. She concentrated on folding the towels precisely while unease crept steadily beneath her skin again. Because Polly was wrong about one thing. Lucien Ravenshade did not notice servants. He observed them. There was a difference. Not warmth. Not affection. Observation. Like a man studying cracks beneath frozen lake ice. By late afternoon the snowfall had worsened. Wind rattled the upper windows hard enough to shake candle flames throughout the west corridors. Several guests scheduled to arrive from London had been delayed overnight because the southern roads became nearly impassable after dark. The manner shifted accordingly. Guest rooms reopened. Additional fires lit. More servants reassigned upstairs. Serafina spent most of the afternoon carrying blankets and fresh coal between unused chambers, while snow whipped violently against the glass outside. Just after 5, Mrs. Weatherby intercepted her near the grand staircase. "You will assist in the library this evening." Serafina stopped immediately. "The East Wing Library?" "No." Mrs. Weatherby sounded impatient already. "The lower library beside the north parlor. His Grace requires additional cataloging completed before tomorrow." Relief moved through Serafina so quickly she almost felt weak from it. "Yes, ma'am." The lower library remained one of the warmer rooms in the manor. Dark walnut shelves stretched from floor to ceiling beside rolling ladders and tall iron lamps. Snowlight glowed pale blue through the windows while fireplaces burned steadily along opposite walls. Serafina arrived carrying ledgers and immediately noticed Lucien seated near the far desk beneath candlelight. Alone, of course. He sat with one elbow resting against the chair arm while reviewing correspondence spread neatly before him. His black coat remained unbuttoned. One glove rested beside an untouched glass of whiskey near his right hand. He looked up the moment she entered. Not surprised. Never surprised. "Your Grace." She curtsied carefully. "You requested assistance?" "I requested someone capable of reading French inventory records without confusing Burgundy wine with furniture polish." His voice remained calm, dry enough that she could not tell whether he joked. Serafina hesitated only a second. "I can read French." Silence settled briefly across the room. Lucien leaned back slightly in his chair. "Can you?" It was not a question. Her stomach tightened immediately. Too late. She should have denied it. A proper maid from Thornmere Hollow should not read French comfortably. Yet exhaustion had weakened her caution for one careless second. Lucien studied her quietly across the firelit room. "Interesting," he said at last. "Mr. Graves neglected to mention that detail." Serafina lowered her gaze quickly. "My mother taught from old church books." "Church books written in French?" She remained silent. The fire cracked softly nearby. Wind struck the windows again. Lucien finally gestured toward the desk opposite him. "Sit." She froze faintly. Servants did not sit beside dukes. Not ever. Lucien noticed immediately. That was not a suggestion. Slowly, Serafina crossed the room and lowered herself carefully into the chair opposite his desk. Her pulse felt uneven again. Too aware of him. Too aware they were alone. Lucien slid several aged ledgers toward her across the polished wood surface. Translate the highlighted portions. She opened the first ledger cautiously. French indeed. Elegant cursive handwriting faded with age beneath estate seals she did not recognize immediately. Then her eyes caught one name. Vale. Her breath nearly stopped. Lucien watched her carefully across the desk. Problem? No, Your Grace. She forced herself to continue reading while ice spread slowly through her chest. The ledger appeared nearly 20 years old. Wine imports. Land transfers. Noble signatures. Yet the Vale crest appeared repeatedly beside financial transactions involving Ravenshade Manor. Serafina swallowed carefully before beginning translation aloud. Her voice remained steady somehow. 20 barrels delivered to Blackmere Harbor. Signed by House Vale under winter contract terms. Lucien said nothing. Only listened. Candlelight moved softly across his face while shadows gathered beneath his eyes. Serafina continued reading for nearly 20 minutes while the storm deepened outside. The room grew warmer. Quieter. Strange. Several times she felt Lucien watching her instead of the documents. Not with suspicion now. Something else. Concentration perhaps. At one point she reached automatically for a fountain pen resting near the ledger margins, and corrected a mistranslated notation without thinking. Silence followed immediately afterward. Serafina realized her mistake too late. She looked up slowly. Lucien's gaze rested directly on the corrected handwriting. You write formal court French. His voice remained very soft now. Dangerous again because of it. Serafina set the pen down carefully. I did not realize. No, he said. You did not. Another silence settled between them. Longer this time. Lucien rose from his chair finally and crossed toward the fireplace with slow measured steps. Serafina watched him despite herself. Snowlight and firelight moved together across his dark clothes. Everything about him carried restraint. Even his silence felt controlled deliberately. Do you know what interests me most about liars? He asked quietly. Fear stirred instantly inside her again. I could not say, Your Grace. Lucien rested one hand against the fireplace mantel without looking at her. The truly dangerous ones never realize when they stop pretending. Serafina's fingers tightened beneath the desk. I am not lying. He glanced back at her then. Gray eyes steady in the firelight. No. No. Then tell me where you learned court French. Her throat tightened. I told you. My mother taught me. Your mother was a laundress dying in a village cottage. The words landed softly, calmly. That made them worse. Serafina stared at him in shock. Lucien continued watching the fire. A woman in that position does not teach advanced language forms used exclusively among nobility. Fear now mixed with something sharper. Anger perhaps. You investigated my mother? Lucien finally looked at her fully again. I investigate everything connected to this house. The answer should not have unsettled her. Yet something about his expression did. Because beneath the cold control, exhaustion flickered there briefly. Old exhaustion. Like someone carrying a burden too long alone. Serafina rose slowly from the chair. If I have offended you, Your Grace, I apologize. Sit down. I would prefer returning downstairs. I know. His voice sharpened slightly for the first time. Not loud. Worse because it was not loud. Sit. She froze. The room became unbearably still around them. Snow battered the windows harder now. Somewhere deep inside the manor, a grandfather clock began striking 6. Lucien crossed back toward the desk slowly until only a few feet separated them. Close enough now that she noticed faint silver strands hidden near his temples beneath the candlelight. Close enough to feel how carefully controlled he truly was. You are frightened of me, he observed quietly. Serafina forced herself to answer honestly. I do not understand you. Something unreadable moved through his expression then. Almost sadness. Gone too quickly to trust. That makes 2 of us. Before she could respond, a sudden knock interrupted the room. Nathaniel Graves entered carrying several sealed letters dusted lightly with snow. He stopped almost immediately upon noticing the tension between them. His eyes moved once from Lucien to Serafina. Nothing in his expression changed. Apologies, Your Grace. The London courier finally arrived. Lucien stepped back at once. The distance returned instantly between them. Controlled again. Untouchable. Leave them there. Nathaniel obeyed before glancing briefly toward Serafina. Mrs. Weatherby requested assistance downstairs. Serafina moved immediately. Thank you. She gathered the ledgers too quickly and nearly dropped one before setting it aside again. Lucien watched silently while she hurried toward the doorway. Just before exiting, his voice stopped her one final time. Serafina. She turned carefully. Lucien remained beside the fireplace with shadows flickering across his face. Tomorrow evening there will be guests arriving from London. Her pulse tightened again instinctively. Yes, Your Grace. I expect you upstairs serving at dinner. Fear returned instantly. Sharp and immediate. Because servants like her were never assigned formal dinners unless specifically chosen. And somehow she already knew this was not a request either. Lucien held her gaze 1 second longer before speaking again. Wear blue. Serafina did not own anything blue. The realization followed her through the entire next morning like a shadow she could not escape. Ravenshade Manor woke early beneath another hard layer of snow. Frost wept across the lower windows. Stable hands shoveled paths through the courtyards before sunrise while servants hurried through corridors carrying silver trays and fresh flowers for the arriving guests from London. Everywhere she looked, the house seemed to be preparing for something larger than a dinner. Additional candles appeared in the grand hall. Musicians arrived shortly after breakfast. Mrs. Weatherby personally inspected the dining room twice before noon. By 10 o'clock the manor no longer felt like a country estate buried in winter. It felt like a stage waiting for actors to arrive. Serafina folded linens inside the upstairs laundry room, while trying unsuccessfully not to think about the Duke's final words from the previous evening. Wear blue. Not a request. An instruction. Which meant one of two things. Either Lucien Ravenshade intended to embarrass her publicly for reasons she did not yet understand, or something far worse was happening. You look pale again. Polly entered carrying fresh aprons bundled against her chest. At this rate Mrs. Weatherby is going to order you into bed. Serafina forced herself back to the present. I am fine. Polly dropped the aprons onto the folding table with a dramatic sigh. No one in this house is fine today. Lady Agatha has screamed at 3 footmen already and cooked nearly through a pan at the pastry girl. She lowered her voice eagerly. They say half the London aristocracy is trapped here tonight because of the roads. Serafina remained quiet. Polly noticed immediately. You really do not care about gossip, do you? Gossip causes trouble. Only when it is true. Before Serafina could answer, the laundry door opened sharply. Mrs. Weatherby entered carrying a large flat box wrapped in cream paper beneath one arm. The room fell silent instantly. Polly straightened so fast she nearly knocked over the folding basket beside her. Mrs. Weatherby approached Serafina directly without speaking. Her expression revealed nothing as usual. That almost made the moment worse. His Grace requested this delivered personally. She held out the box. Serafina stared at it without moving. For me. Mrs. Weatherby's eyes sharpened faintly. Do you see another servant standing here? Polly made a tiny choking sound beside the folding table. Serafina accepted the box carefully. It felt heavier than expected. Thank you, ma'am. Mrs. Weatherby studied her one moment longer. Not coldly this time. Uneasily. You are to dress before 6 o'clock. Then she turned and left the room without another word. Silence remained behind her. Polly stared openly now. If that box contains jewelry, I am going to faint. It does not. Serafina hoped it did not. Her pulse already felt unstable again. Polly moved closer immediately. Open it. Polly. Open it. Reluctantly, Serafina untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Blue silk caught the morning light instantly. Polly gasped so loudly someone laughed from the corridor outside. The gown folded inside looked impossibly elegant for a servant's uniform. Midnight blue. Long sleeves. Soft silver embroidery stitched subtly along the cuffs and neckline. Not extravagant enough for nobility. Far too beautiful for staff clothing. Serafina touched the fabric carefully. Her fingertips paused against the silk. Something flickered unexpectedly through her chest. Familiarity. The sensation vanished almost immediately. Polly looked horrified now. That dress costs more than my father's farm. Serafina closed the lid quickly. Lower your voice. I am serious. Polly stared at her. What is happening? Serafina wished desperately she knew. By late afternoon the manor filled with arriving guests escaping the worsening storms across southern England. Carriages rolled continuously through the front courtyard, while snow whipped violently around lantern light outside. Nobles entered wrapped in fur-lined coats beside servants carrying trunks and hat boxes through the grand entrance. Names drifted constantly through the hallways. The Marquis of Evermont, Lady Beatrice Holloway, Viscount Ashcombe. People powerful enough that even longtime staff moved more carefully around them. Serafina avoided the main corridors whenever possible. Every hour her unease deepened. Because the closer evening came, the more Ravenshade Manor felt like a trap slowly closing around her. At 5:30 she finally carried the blue gown upstairs to the servants' washroom beside the western attic corridor. The room remained small and cold despite the steam rising from copper water basins along the walls. Several maids preparing for dinner service stopped speaking the moment she entered carrying silk instead of gray servant cotton. Their eyes widened immediately. Serafina ignored them. She changed quickly behind the privacy screen near the window. The gown fit perfectly. Too perfectly. As though tailored specifically for her measurements. Fear moved quietly through her again. Because no one could have taken those measurements without noticing her long ago. She stepped from behind the screen slowly. Silence followed instantly. Even the older maid stopped moving now. Serafina looked toward the cracked mirror hanging above the wash basin. For one strange second she failed to recognize herself completely. The dark blue silk transformed her somehow. Her pale skin looked brighter beside the deep color. Her blonde hair, usually pinned tightly beneath servant caps, fell softer around her shoulders tonight after Polly insisted on helping arrange it properly. She no longer looked invisible. That frightened her more than anything else. You look like one of them, a younger maid whispered before quickly lowering her eyes. Serafina stared at her reflection without answering. Because somewhere deep inside, something painful twisted unexpectedly beneath her ribs. Not pride. Recognition. Like remembering a song she had forgotten years ago. A sudden knock interrupted the room. Nathaniel Graves appeared in the doorway wearing a dark formal coat dusted lightly with snowflakes. His eyes found Serafina immediately. Not surprised. Again. Never surprised. Dinner service begins in 10 minutes, he said calmly. Several maids instantly scattered from the room pretending sudden interest in towels and cosmetics. Nathaniel stepped farther inside once they disappeared. His Grace requests you remain in the north dining corridor before guests enter. Serafina swallowed carefully. Why? Nathaniel regarded her quietly for several seconds before answering. Because certain people are arriving tonight. Her pulse tightened instantly. What people? Nathaniel's expression shifted slightly then. Regret perhaps. The kind who remember faces. Before she could ask another question, he stepped aside from the doorway. Come. The north dining corridor glowed gold beneath dozens of candles when they arrived downstairs. Crystal chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors, while footmen moved silently preparing final wine placements before dinner. Beyond the tall double doors, aristocratic laughter drifted faintly from the receiving hall. Serafina stopped walking immediately when she noticed Lucien standing alone beside the staircase balcony overlooking the entrance below. He wore formal black evening clothes perfectly tailored against his tall frame. One hand rested behind his back while the other held a whiskey glass untouched near his side. Snowlight and candlelight moved together across his face. He turned the moment she entered the corridor. Silence followed. Nathaniel quietly disappeared without explanation. Serafina suddenly wished he had not. Lucien's eyes moved over her slowly. Not like a man admiring beauty. Worse again. Like someone confirming memory against reality. The blue gown. Her hair. Her posture. Every detail seemed to strike him silently one after another. Something unreadable darkened his expression briefly. Turn around, he said quietly. Her heartbeat stumbled. Your Grace. Turn. Slowly Serafina obeyed. The silk shifted softly around her ankles while candlelight caught silver threadwork near the hem. When she faced him again, Lucien remained perfectly still beside the balcony. You have done this before, he said. Not a question. Serafina frowned faintly. Done what? Entered a formal dinner. No, that is not true. Fear returned instantly. I am a servant. Lucian stepped closer. Not hurried. Never hurried. You place your shoulders correctly for court presentation. His voice lowered further. You walk this corridor exactly the way Lady Evelyn Vale used to. The name struck something buried deep inside her mind. A flash. Candlelight. Music. White gloves brushing her hair back gently while a woman laughed softly nearby. Then gone again. Serafina pressed one hand against the edge of the nearby table instinctively. Lucian noticed immediately. What did you remember? Nothing. Serafina. Nothing. Her voice came sharper now. Uneven. Lucian studied her face carefully. Not cruelly. Almost cautiously. You are beginning to remember. Stop saying that. The words escaped before she could control them. Silence fell instantly across the corridor. Somewhere downstairs, guests laughed loudly near the receiving hall. Serafina lowered her gaze at once. Forgive me, Your Grace. Lucian did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded quieter than before. You think I am trying to harm you? She looked up slowly. Are you? For the first time since she met him, uncertainty crossed his expression. Real uncertainty. It vanished almost immediately beneath control again. No, he said. I am trying to keep you alive. Before she could respond, the grand staircase doors opened below them. More guests entered the manor laughing against the winter cold. Lucian's eyes shifted toward the entrance hall beneath the balcony. Then his entire expression hardened instantly. Serafina followed his gaze downward. A tall older woman wrapped in silver fur had just entered beside two younger aristocrats. Her white hair gleamed beneath chandelier light. Emeralds rested at her throat. She moved slowly but with unmistakable authority. Every servant nearby lowered their heads immediately. Lucian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Damn! Serafina looked back at him. Who is she? His eyes never left the woman downstairs. Someone who should not recognize you this quickly. Then the older woman looked up toward the balcony. Directly at Serafina. And the color disappeared completely from her face. The woman in silver fur stopped moving entirely at the bottom of the staircase. Conversation continued around her for several seconds before nearby nobles slowly noticed the change in her expression. One gentleman nearly collided with a footman while turning to see what had captured her attention so completely. Serafina felt the air leave her lungs. Because the older woman was staring directly at her with unmistakable recognition. Not curiosity. Recognition. Lucian moved immediately. His hand closed lightly around Serafina's wrist before anyone downstairs could observe the gesture clearly. Do not speak, he said quietly. Then he guided her backward away from the balcony just as Lady Agatha emerged from the receiving hall below. The older Duchess followed the direction of everyone's attention upward. Her face drained instantly as well. For one terrible second, Serafina understood absolutely nothing except this. Everyone in Ravenshade Manor had expected something tonight. And somehow she was standing at the center of it without knowing why. Lucian released her wrist only after they reached the darker corridor beside the north staircase alcove. Music drifted faintly from the ballroom preparation rooms downstairs. Guests laughed somewhere near the wine parlor. But here, hidden partially behind heavy velvet curtains and shadowed walls, the manor suddenly felt dangerously quiet again. Who is that woman? Serafina whispered. Lucian looked toward the receiving hall entrance before answering. Dowager Duchess Evelyn Ashbourne. She knows me. Yes. The calm certainty of his answer frightened her more than denial would have. Serafina stepped back instinctively. Then tell me why. Lucian's gaze shifted to her slowly. Candlelight moved across the sharp lines of his face while distant voices echoed through the staircase below. Not here. You keep saying that. Her voice trembled despite her efforts to steady it. You keep saying later. Or soon. Or not here. Lucian said nothing. That silence finally cracked something inside her. I am tired of being looked at like a secret. The words escaped more sharply than intended. Lucian remained completely still. Serafina. No, she shook her head once. Everyone in this house knows something except me. Her breathing felt uneven now. You ask strange questions. You dress me like this. You watch me constantly. And now aristocrats are staring at me like they have seen a ghost. Lucien studied her face quietly while voices drifted closer through the receiving hall downstairs. For one brief moment, exhaustion overtook the cold control in his expression again. You are not ready. That is not your decision. His jaw tightened faintly. Actually, it is. Anger flashed unexpectedly through her fear. Why? Silence. Then Lucien looked directly into her eyes and answered with terrifying honesty. Because if the wrong people recognize you before I can protect you, you will not survive what follows. The words settled coldly between them. Serafina stared at him without breathing. Somewhere below them, the orchestra finally began warming instruments for dinner music. Violins drifted faintly upward through the staircase. The sound felt impossibly distant. Protect me from what? She whispered. Before Lucien could answer, footsteps approached rapidly from the corridor behind them. Nathaniel Graves appeared first, visibly tense for the first time since she met him. Lady Agatha followed close behind, wrapped in dark emerald silk with irritation carved sharply across her features. The dowager saw her clearly, Lady Agatha said immediately. 3 other guests noticed the reaction. Lucien's attention shifted instantly back toward the staircase below. Has Evelyn spoken yet? Not publicly. Nathaniel lowered his voice. But she asked twice who the girl in blue was. Serafina looked between them in growing disbelief. They spoke about her as though she were not standing there. Someone needs to explain what is happening. Lady Agatha finally looked directly at her. The older woman's expression softened only slightly. You have your mother's eyes. Serafina froze. The comment struck somewhere deep inside her chest before she fully understood why. You knew my mother? Lady Agatha exchanged one unreadable glance with Lucien. Too quick. Too practiced. I knew a woman who called herself Catherine Voss, she answered carefully. But that was never her real name. The world seemed to tilt again beneath Serafina's feet. No, she shook her head immediately. You are wrong. I wish I was. Lucien stepped forward before Lady Agatha could continue further. Enough. His tone ended the conversation instantly. Nathaniel fell silent at once. Even Lady Agatha looked displeased but obeyed. Lucien turned back toward Serafina more carefully now. Tonight changes nothing. She stared at him in disbelief. Everything has already changed. For a second, something almost painful crossed his face. Gone too quickly again. Listen to me carefully. His voice lowered. When dinner begins, you will remain beside the West Service entrance. You will not speak to guests unless absolutely necessary. And if Evelyn Ashbourne approaches you directly, you will leave immediately and find me. Why? Because she remembers things most people buried 20 years ago. Before Serafina could respond, movement below caught everyone's attention again. The grand dining room doors had opened. Guests slowly began moving toward dinner service beneath glittering chandeliers and candlelight. Laughter echoed upward through the marble halls. Lucien glanced toward the staircase once before speaking quietly to Nathaniel. Stay near her. Nathaniel nodded immediately. Then Lucien looked back at Serafina one final time. Do not wander tonight. She almost laughed from disbelief. Wander. As though she were a child capable of getting lost in snow, instead of a woman trapped inside a mystery swallowing her entire life piece by piece. But before she could answer, Lucien was already descending the staircase toward his waiting guests below. The transformation happened instantly. One moment he stood beside her in shadow speaking softly about danger and secrets. The next he became the Duke again. Cold. Controlled. Untouchable. Nobles greeted him the moment he entered the receiving hall. Smiles appeared. Conversations shifted around him naturally. The entire room bent subtly toward his presence. Serafina watched from the corridor above while unease twisted steadily through her chest. You should breathe, Nathaniel said quietly beside her. She looked at him sharply. I am breathing. Barely. His calmness suddenly irritated her. Does everyone in this house speak in riddles? Something unexpected flickered briefly in Nathaniel's expression. Sympathy perhaps. Only when the truth is dangerous. Then tell me something simple. Her voice lowered. Who am I? Nathaniel looked down toward the crowded receiving hall below before answering. That, he said quietly, is the one question His Grace has been trying to solve since he was 19 years old. Dinner began precisely at 7. Nearly 40 guests filled the enormous formal dining room beneath crystal chandeliers and towering arrangements of white winter roses. Gold candlelight reflected across polished silver and dark wine glasses while servants moved silently between courses like shadows trained not to exist. Serafina remained near the west service entrance exactly where Lucian instructed. Nathaniel stayed nearby as well, pretending to supervise wine service while actually watching the room with unsettling precision. Several times throughout dinner Serafina caught aristocratic guests glancing toward her. Not openly. Quietly. Confused perhaps by the blue gown or the fact that the Duke himself occasionally looked toward the service corridor more often than necessary. She kept her eyes lowered whenever possible. Yet tension built steadily with every passing minute. Especially because Dowager Duchess Evelyn Ashbourne had not stopped watching her once. The older woman sat halfway down the massive dining table surrounded by politicians and nobles discussing Parliament. Yet her pale eyes drifted toward Serafina repeatedly throughout the evening. Not casual observation. Careful study. Around the third course, Lucian rose briefly from his seat to speak with a visiting earl near the fireplace. The movement shifted attention across the room naturally for several seconds. It was enough. Evelyn Ashbourne stood slowly from her chair. Serafina felt her stomach drop instantly. The older Duchess crossed the dining room with measured grace despite her age while conversation continued around her uninterrupted. Nathaniel noticed immediately and straightened beside the wine cart. Too late. Evelyn stopped directly in front of Serafina near the service entrance. Up close, the older woman's face revealed deep lines earned through decades of power and memory. Emerald earrings trembled softly beneath silver hair. "What is your name?" she asked quietly. Serafina remembered Lucian's warning instantly. "Leave immediately. Find me." But her feet would not move. "Serafina, Your Grace." Evelyn's eyes sharpened. "No," the word came almost like grief. "That is not the name I remember." Fear climbed sharply through Serafina's chest now. Nearby servants began noticing the interaction. Nathaniel moved toward them quickly from across the room. Evelyn ignored him completely. Her pale gaze remained fixed on Serafina's face. "You have her mouth," she whispered softly. "And Evelyn's eyes." Then the older woman lifted trembling fingers toward the delicate silver pendant, hidden partly beneath the neckline of Serafina's blue gown. A pendant Serafina had worn her entire life without understanding where it came from. Evelyn's face lost all remaining color the moment she saw it fully. "Dear God." Her whisper barely carried above the orchestra music. The veil crest. The room around Serafina suddenly felt very far away. Nathaniel reached them at exactly the same moment Lucian turned from across the dining hall, and saw the pendant exposed in candlelight between them. And for the first time since she met him, real fear crossed the Duke's face. For one suspended second the dining room forgot how to breathe. Candlelight trembled softly across silver and crystal, while the orchestra continued playing somewhere beyond the far ballroom doors, unaware that an entire room had just shifted beneath the surface of polite society. Evelyn Ashbourne still stared at the pendant resting against Serafina's throat. The older Duchess looked suddenly fragile beneath her diamonds and silver silk. Not weak. Shaken. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. Serafina's fingers moved instinctively toward the pendant. A small silver crest no larger than $50 rested against her skin. She had worn it since childhood. Her mother once told her never to remove it, even during sleep, especially during travel. At the time Serafina thought it was sentiment. Now she was no longer certain of anything. "It belonged to my mother," she answered quietly. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. The reaction lasted barely a second. Long enough. Lucian reached them immediately afterward. "That is enough, Duchess." His voice remained controlled. Too controlled. Nathaniel appeared beside him almost simultaneously, positioning himself subtly between the surrounding guests and the service entrance corridor. Nearby aristocrats had begun noticing the tension now. Conversation lowered gradually around the dining table like wind disappearing before a storm. Evelyn lifted her eyes slowly toward Lucian. "You knew." The accusation beneath the words carried clearly despite her soft tone. Lucien did not answer immediately. That silence became answer enough. Serafina looked between them in growing disbelief. Someone needs to explain this. Not here, Lucien said instantly. Stop saying that. Her voice sharpened before she could stop it. Several nearby guests turned fully toward them now. A viscount near the fireplace lowered his wine glass halfway. Lady Agatha stood abruptly farther down the table. Lucien's attention flicked once across the room, assessing the danger with frightening speed. Then he reached gently for Serafina's arm. Come with me. She stepped back before he could touch her fully. No surprise flickered briefly across his face. Not because she resisted. Because she did it publicly. Serafina, you do not get to order me around anymore until you tell me what is happening. Silence followed instantly around them. Even the nearest servants froze. Lucien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Yet his voice remained calm. You are upset. I am terrified. The honesty in the words seemed to strike him harder than anger would have. For one brief moment, something dark and exhausted moved through his expression again. I know. Evelyn Ashbourne finally stepped forward slowly. The girl deserves the truth. Lucien looked at her sharply. And if half this room hears it? Half this room already suspects it. She gestured faintly toward Serafina's pendant. That crest disappeared 20 years ago with House Vale. A murmur moved quietly through the nearest nobles. Very small. Very dangerous. Serafina felt the room tilt beneath her feet again. House Vale. The name echoed through her memory strangely now. Not unfamiliar. Buried. Like hearing music from another floor of a forgotten house. Lucien noticed the growing attention immediately. Dinner is concluded, he announced suddenly to the room without raising his voice. The authority in it silenced everyone at once. The weather has delayed tomorrow's travel regardless. We will continue discussions in the west drawing room after coffee. Guests exchanged confused glances but obeyed instinctively. Dukes did not explain themselves. They rearranged entire rooms with a sentence. Servants moved immediately to clear courses while nobles slowly rose from the table. Conversation returned carefully, artificially. Serafina stood motionless beside the service entrance while the world around her resumed, pretending nothing had happened. Lucien lowered his voice once the nearest guests moved away. You are coming with me now. This time she did not resist. Not because she trusted him. Because she no longer trusted the room around them. Nathaniel escorted them silently through the north corridor while Lady Agatha intercepted several approaching aristocrats with smooth practiced distractions behind them. Serafina barely noticed any of it. Her mind remained trapped on one impossible thought. House Vale. The private study in the east wing felt colder than before. Lucien closed the heavy door behind them himself while Nathaniel remained stationed outside in the corridor. Firelight moved softly across the dark bookshelves and stone walls. The hidden portrait remained concealed somewhere beyond the shelves, exactly where she first found it days ago. Only now the room no longer felt mysterious. It felt personal. Dangerous in an entirely different way. Serafina turned toward Lucien immediately the moment they were alone. Do not lie to me again. He removed his glove slowly before answering. I never lied to you. She stared at him in disbelief. You let me believe I was a servant with no family while everyone around me whispers about dead noble houses. Lucien's expression tightened faintly. I let you survive. By hiding things from me. Yes. The blunt honesty stunned her silent for half a second. Lucien crossed toward the fireplace while snow rattled softly against the windows outside. When you arrived here 2 years ago, you knew nothing. Because no one told me anything. Because someone made certain you remembered nothing. His voice lowered slightly. There is a difference. Serafina's pulse turned uneven again. What does that mean? Lucien looked at the fire instead of her. Tell me about your earliest memory. She frowned faintly. What? Your earliest clear memory. Why? Because I need to know how much was taken from you. The sentence moved through the room like cold air beneath a locked door. Serafina stared at him several seconds before answering slowly. I remember snow. Her voice sounded distant even to herself now. A cottage. My mother singing while sewing near the fire. Lucien remained silent. Waiting. Before that. She stopped. Her chest tightened strangely. There are pieces. What kind of pieces? Serafina closed her eyes briefly, trying to grasp the fragments drifting through her mind. A large hallway. Her breathing slowed unconsciously. Music. Candles. Another flash struck unexpectedly then. A man lifting her into his arms while someone shouted in another room. The scent of smoke. Her small hand gripping dark velvet tightly. Serafina's eyes opened instantly. Her pulse raced now. There was a fire. Lucien's attention sharpened immediately. What else? I do not know. She pressed trembling fingers against her temple. I cannot. Her breath caught suddenly as another image surfaced harder than the others. A woman kneeling in front of her. Beautiful. Pale. Crying. Pressing the silver pendant into Serafina's small hands while saying something urgently. Run. The memory disappeared before the words fully formed. Serafina staggered slightly backward. Lucien moved toward her immediately. Sit down. No, she steadied herself against the desk edge instead. Who was she? Lucien stopped only inches away now. Too close. Your mother. The room went silent except for the fire. Serafina stared at him without breathing. Catherine Voss was not my mother. Lucien's gray eyes remained fixed steadily on hers. No, then who was? Something shifted behind his expression then. Not hesitation exactly. Grief perhaps. Old grief worn smooth with time. Lady Evelyn Vale. The name struck her like a physical thing. Serafina looked away instantly because suddenly tears threatened without warning, and she did not understand why. Lady Evelyn Vale. The woman from her fragmented memories. The woman with candlelight against pale skin and shaking hands pressing silver into her palms. No, she whispered weakly. That is impossible. Lucien's voice softened for the first time since she met him. I wish it was. She shook her head immediately. If I belonged to some noble family, why was I raised in a cottage? Lucien's silence answered before his words did. Fear climbed sharply through her chest again. What happened to them? He looked toward the hidden shelves briefly. House Vale disappeared during the winter of 1804. Disappeared how? Another pause. Too long. Officially. Lucien's voice remained calm. A carriage accident during a storm crossing the northern cliffs. Serafina stared at him. And unofficially? His eyes returned slowly to hers. Someone wanted the Vale bloodline erased. The fire cracked sharply behind them. Serafina suddenly realized she was trembling again. Not from cold this time. Why? Lucien held her gaze quietly. Because your family possessed something powerful enough that several noble houses preferred them dead. Before she could respond, a sudden knock interrupted the room. Nathaniel entered immediately without waiting. Tension lined his face now. Your Grace. Lucien turned sharply. What happened? Nathaniel glanced once toward Serafina before answering carefully. Lord Ashcombe recognized the pendant. Silence fell instantly. Nathaniel continued quietly. And he just sent a private message to London. Lucien's expression changed completely then. Not fear this time. Calculation. Cold and immediate. Serafina watched it happen in real time. The Duke disappeared. Something far more dangerous surfaced beneath him instead. Seal the east gates, Lucien said calmly. No guests leave Ravenshade tonight. Then his eyes moved back toward Serafina with terrifying focus. It begins sooner than I expected. Snow hammered against the manor windows hard enough to rattle the glass inside its frames. Ravenshade had become an island by midnight. No carriage could survive the northern roads now. Wind buried the outer gates beneath drifts nearly 3 feet deep, while servants rushed through corridors securing shutters and feeding fires throughout the estate. Yet inside the East Wing study, the coldest thing in the room was no longer winter. It was silence. Serafina stood beside the desk staring at Lucien after Nathaniel's warning, while dozens of impossible thoughts collided inside her mind at once. House Vale. Hidden bloodlines. Noble families erased. Men sending messages to London because of a pendant she had worn since childhood without understanding its meaning. None of it felt real. And somehow the most frightening part remained Lucien himself. Because he did not look surprised anymore. He looked prepared. Nathaniel closed the study door carefully behind him. The staff believes the gates were sealed because of weather concerns, he said quietly. Good. Lucian crossed toward the window overlooking the eastern courtyard. Snowlight reflected faintly against his dark coat, while firelight moved behind him across the shelves. Has Ashcombe attempted another courier? Not yet. Nathaniel hesitated briefly. But he is asking questions. Of course he is. Serafina watched them both in disbelief. You speak as though this happens often. Lucian looked back toward her slowly. Not often. His gray eyes settled on her face with exhausting intensity. Only once before. The answer tightened something painfully inside her chest. When? Another pause. Lucian seemed to measure every sentence before allowing it into the room. The night your family disappeared. Silence followed immediately. Nathaniel lowered his gaze slightly. Even he looked uncomfortable now. Serafina pressed trembling fingers against the edge of the desk beside her. You were there. Lucian did not answer immediately. Yes. How old were you? 19. A strange image flickered unexpectedly through her mind then. A younger man standing beside heavy iron gates in falling snow. Dark hair. Gray eyes. Blood on one sleeve. The memory struck so suddenly she inhaled sharply. Lucian noticed instantly. What did you remember? Nothing. She shook her head too quickly. Only pieces. Lucian stepped closer now. Careful. Controlled. Tell me. I said it was nothing. Serafina. Stop saying my name like you already know everything about me. The words echoed harder than intended through the study walls. Nathaniel quietly moved toward the door again. I should check the west corridor. Lucian nodded once without taking his eyes from her. The moment Nathaniel disappeared outside, silence returned heavier than before. Serafina turned away from Lucian immediately and crossed toward the fireplace, trying unsuccessfully to steady her breathing. You should have told me earlier. Lucian remained where he stood near the desk. Probably. She looked back at him sharply. That is all you have to say? No, his voice lowered. But it is the safest truth at the moment. Anger moved unexpectedly through her exhaustion now. You keep talking about safety as though I belong to you. Something changed behind his expression then. Very small. Very dangerous. That was never the intention. Then what was? Lucian's gaze held her steadily across the firelit room. To keep you alive long enough to choose your own future. The answer struck her silent. Because beneath the cold restraint in his voice, something else existed now. Something frighteningly sincere. Serafina looked away first. The fire crackled softly beside her while snow battered the windows harder outside. Her pulse remained uneven. You said someone wanted my family erased. Yes. Who? Lucian crossed slowly toward the bookshelf near the far wall. Several noble houses benefited financially after House Vale vanished. He reached toward one locked drawer hidden behind leather volumes and removed a folded document sealed with dark wax. Land. Shipping routes. Parliamentary influence. He handed the papers toward her carefully. The Vale family controlled more territory in northern England than most people realized. Serafina accepted the document with shaking hands. Elegant names covered the pages beneath faded signatures and estate markings. Ashcombe appeared repeatedly among them. So did Holloway. Pembroke. Families currently sleeping beneath Ravenshade's roof tonight. Fear crept slowly through her chest again. These people are here. Yes. And they know about me now. Lucian did not soften the truth. Some of them suspect. She stared down at the papers while another memory surfaced suddenly without warning. A ballroom glowing gold beneath hundreds of candles. A woman whispering sharply behind a fan. Hide the child. Serafina pressed one hand hard against her temple. Lucian reached her immediately. What happened? I heard something. Her breathing turned shallow. Someone saying hide the child. Lucian's face tightened instantly. Who? I do not know. The room seemed to sway slightly around her now. I remember music. Then shouting. Another flash struck. A man slamming heavy doors closed while smoke filled a hallway. Her small hands clutching velvet curtains. Running footsteps. Serafina stumbled backward. Lucian caught her arms before she lost balance completely. Warm hands. Steady. strong enough that for one dangerous second she almost leaned into them without thinking. Easy. His voice lowered near her ear. Breathe slowly. She realized then how close they stood. Too close. His hands remained around her arms while firelight flickered across the sharp lines of his face. The storm outside disappeared briefly beneath the terrifying awareness of him. Serafina pulled away first. Lucien released her immediately. Yet the space between them still felt altered somehow afterward. Dangerous in a completely different way now. I need air. No, the answer came instantly. She stared at him. I am not a prisoner. Tonight you are a target. You cannot lock me in this room. Watch me. Silence crashed between them. Lucien's voice had not risen. Somehow that made the command worse. Serafina stepped back slowly. You do not own me. Something unreadable moved behind his eyes then. No, his voice lowered almost painfully. But I gave my word I would protect you. The words unsettled her more than anger would have. Because suddenly she remembered the inscription behind the portrait. For Lucien. Protect her from them. Her heartbeat stumbled once. Who told you to protect me? Lucien looked toward the fire instead of answering immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded distant. Older somehow. Your father. The room fell silent except for the storm. Serafina stared at him without moving. You knew my father. Briefly. And Lucien's jaw tightened faintly. He trusted the wrong people. Another memory surfaced then. Not visual this time. Emotional. Safety. The feeling of sitting high in someone's arms while deep laughter echoed nearby. Serafina swallowed hard against sudden tears she did not understand. What was his name? Lucien hesitated. Just once. Alexander Vale. The name moved through her like a bell struck deep underwater. Something ancient and buried shifted painfully inside her chest. Before she could respond, another knock interrupted the study door sharply. Nathaniel entered immediately. Tension lined his expression now. Your Grace. Lucien turned. What happened? Lady Holloway attempted to question staff about the girl in blue. Nathaniel glanced briefly toward Serafina. And Lord Ashcombe has requested a private audience with you. Lucien's face hardened again instantly. Duke Ravenshade returned all at once. Cold. Controlled. Ruthlessly calm. Denied. I already did. Nathaniel stepped farther into the room, lowering his voice further. There is another problem. Lucien waited. Nathaniel looked directly at Serafina this time. Someone entered the Old East archives tonight. Silence followed. Serafina frowned faintly. What archives? Lucien's expression darkened dangerously now. The records containing everything about House Vale. Fear returned instantly beneath her ribs. Were they stolen? Nathaniel shook his head once. No, another pause. But one portrait is missing. Lucien went completely still. The kind of stillness that meant violence existed somewhere beneath it waiting for release. Which portrait? Nathaniel answered quietly. The one of Lady Evelyn Vale holding her daughter. Serafina felt cold spread through her entire body. Because somehow, before Nathaniel finished speaking fully, she already knew exactly what portrait he meant. And somewhere deep inside her fractured memory, she could suddenly see the painting clearly. Her mother wearing white silk beside a little girl in blue velvet. The child had pale eyes, dark blonde curls, and Lucien Ravenshade standing in the background watching both of them like they already belonged to his future. The memory disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. 1 second Serafina could see the painted room clearly. Candlelight. Velvet curtains. Lucien standing behind her mother beside a winter garden window. The next second it shattered apart like ice breaking beneath dark water. She gripped the edge of the desk hard enough that her knuckles whitened. I remember him. Her own voice sounded distant now. Uncertain. Lucien's attention sharpened instantly. Your father. She shook her head slowly. You. Silence filled the study. Nathaniel looked immediately toward Lucien. Something unreadable passed briefly between them before disappearing again. Serafina stared at Lucien, trying desperately to hold on to the fading memory before it vanished entirely. You were older. Her breathing remained uneven. Not much older. Maybe 17. 18. Lucien said nothing. His stillness became answer enough. There was a painting. She pressed trembling fingers against her temple again. My mother was sitting beside a window. I was standing near her chair. Another fractured image surfaced. Young Lucien kneeling slightly so his eyes matched hers while placing a tiny silver horse into her small hands. The warmth of his gloves. Snow outside the windows. You gave me something. Lucien closed his eyes briefly. Only once. When he opened them again, all emotion had disappeared beneath control. A carved horse. Serafina's breath caught. You remember. I remember everything. The words settled heavily into the room. Nathaniel quietly moved toward the bookshelf beside the fireplace, pretending interest in papers that clearly no longer mattered. Serafina stared at Lucien without speaking for several seconds. Then why do I barely remember any of it? Lucien looked toward the storm-dark windows. Trauma buries memory. That is not the whole answer. No, his honesty remained infuriating because it never sounded defensive. Only exhausted. Serafina crossed slowly toward him now. Tell me what happened that night. Lucien's jaw tightened faintly. Not tonight. Anger flashed instantly through her exhaustion. Stop deciding what I can handle. I am deciding what keeps you breathing. You cannot protect me from my own life. Watch me. The sharpness in his voice silenced the room for one brief second. Not loud. Dangerous because it came from somewhere real beneath all his restraint. Lucien stepped back immediately afterward as though he regretted revealing even that much emotion. The more you remember too quickly, the more vulnerable you become. Serafina laughed once softly, bitterly. I am already vulnerable. Before Lucien could answer, another violent gust struck the east wing windows hard enough to shake the glass. Somewhere deeper in the manor, servants hurried through corridors securing shutters against worsening weather. Nathaniel crossed toward the door after hearing footsteps pass outside. The guests are becoming restless, he said quietly. Ashcombe has started asking why the gates were sealed. Lucien looked toward him without hesitation. Keep him distracted. Nathaniel nodded once. And the Dowager Duchess? A shadow moved behind Lucien's eyes. Evelyn knows enough already. Nathaniel hesitated. She also knows what the veil crest means politically. Silence followed. Serafina frowned faintly. Politically. Neither man answered immediately. That silence frightened her more than words. Tell me. Lucien finally spoke without looking at her. House Vale controlled 1/3 of the northern trade routes before the fire. And if there is a surviving heir. His eyes lifted slowly toward hers now. Every inheritance agreement made after your family disappeared becomes questionable. The realization hit coldly. People stole my family's land. Yes. And if I am alive, Nathaniel finished quietly, some of the most powerful families in England lose everything. The room suddenly felt too small. Serafina stepped backward instinctively. The pendant at her throat felt heavier now somehow. Not jewelry. Evidence. This is insane. Lucien's expression remained grimly calm. Unfortunately, it is also true. Another memory surfaced suddenly then. Men arguing loudly in a candlelit room while her father slammed documents against a desk. Someone shouting about Parliament. Another voice saying the Veil Girl cannot survive this. Serafina inhaled sharply. They knew. Lucien moved toward her immediately. What did you remember? Men arguing. She closed her eyes, trying desperately to hold on to the fragments before they dissolved again. Someone said I could not survive. Lucien went very still. Anything else? No, she opened her eyes again, frustrated. It keeps disappearing. His voice lowered slightly. That may not be accidental. Fear crept slowly through her chest. What does that mean? Lucien glanced once toward Nathaniel before answering carefully. There were rumors after the fire. Rumors about what? Another pause. That certain physicians in London specialized in memory treatment. Serafina stared at him. You mean doctors? Not exactly. Nathaniel spoke quietly now. Some aristocratic families paid large sums to erase inconvenient memories after scandals. The room tilted faintly beneath her feet again. You think someone did that to me? Lucien's silence answered first. I think someone wanted you hidden so completely that even you would never search for yourself. The thought felt horrifying precisely because part of her already believed it. She turned away sharply and crossed toward the fireplace again, trying to breathe normally. Flames shifted softly against black stone while snowstorm winds howled beyond the manor walls. Somewhere below them, distant laughter still drifted faintly from the trapped guests, pretending tonight remained ordinary. Nothing about her life felt ordinary anymore. "Did my mother know you?" she asked quietly after several moments. Lucian answered without hesitation. "Yes." "How well?" Another silence. Longer this time. Nathaniel discreetly moved toward the door again, sensing the shift immediately. Lucian remained near the desk, watching the fire carefully. "Our families were close when I was younger." "That is not what I asked." He looked at her then. Truly looked at her. "Your mother trusted me." Something in the answer unsettled her unexpectedly. "And my father?" "He trusted me too." "Enough to leave me with you?" Lucian's jaw tightened again. "Enough to ask it of me while his house burned." The word struck hard enough that Serafina forgot to breathe entirely. Images flashed violently now. Smoke. Snow. Her father kneeling in front of Lucian, gripping his coat with ash-stained hands. Protect her. Another memory overlapped it instantly. Her mother crying while pressing the pendant into Lucian's palm before he fastened it around little Serafina's neck himself. She staggered backward sharply. Lucian caught her before she hit the bookshelf behind her. "Easy. You were there." Her voice shook now. "You were there the whole time." Lucian's hands remained steady around her arms. "Yes. And you never came for me after." The accusation escaped before she fully understood it herself. Something changed instantly behind his eyes. Pain. Real pain. Gone almost immediately, beneath control again. "I searched for you for 11 years. Silence followed. Serafina stared at him. His hands slowly loosened from her arms but did not fully release. "Every orphan registry in England." His voice remained quiet now. "Every convent school. Every northern village after storms." Another pause. "I buried 6 girls because someone misidentified bodies." The confession hit harder because he delivered it without emotion. Flat. Exhausted. Like a man too tired to survive grief theatrically anymore. Serafina looked away first because suddenly her chest hurt in a way she could not explain. Lucian finally stepped back fully. The distance between them returned at once. "When Nathaniel found you working here 2 years ago, I thought I was hallucinating." Nathaniel glanced toward the floor silently. "You recognized me immediately?" Serafina whispered. "The first day." Another memory surfaced faintly now. Herself arriving at Ravenshade Manor during heavy rain, carrying one worn suitcase while Mrs. Weatherby questioned her near the servant entrance. A man standing unseen at the upper landing above, watching silently from shadow. Lucian. He had known from the beginning. "You let me scrub floors while knowing who I was." Lucian's expression darkened slightly. "I let you stay alive while I tried to understand who else knew." "That is not an answer." "It is the only one I have." Before she could respond again, sudden shouting echoed faintly from somewhere downstairs. Nathaniel moved immediately toward the corridor door. A second later, heavy footsteps approached rapidly outside the study. The door burst open before anyone could stop it. Lord Ashcombe entered without invitation, wearing irritation and wine across his sharp aristocratic features. 2 younger noblemen followed close behind him. Ashcombe's eyes landed instantly on Serafina standing beside Lucian in blue silk and firelight. Recognition flashed openly across his face now. Dangerous recognition. "Well," he said softly, "this explains quite a lot." Lucian moved in front of Serafina before Ashcombe could step farther into the room. "You were not invited here." Ashcombe smiled faintly. "No. But I became curious after Evelyn Ashbourne nearly collapsed downstairs over a servant girl wearing the veil crest." His attention shifted deliberately toward Serafina again. "Or perhaps not a servant after all." The room went deadly quiet. Ashcombe's smile widened slightly. "Tell me, Your Grace." His voice lowered. "Does London know you have been hiding the last surviving veil heir inside your manor?" The storm outside seemed to pause with the room. Snow struck the manor walls in long violent waves while firelight flickered across Ashcombe's face, sharpening the satisfaction in his expression. Serafina stood frozen behind Lucien, trying unsuccessfully to steady her breathing. Last surviving veil heir. Hearing the words spoken aloud changed something. The secret no longer lived quietly inside whispers and hidden portraits. It existed now. In the room. In front of witnesses. Dangerous because it could not be buried again. Lucien remained perfectly still between her and Ashcombe. "You are drunk," he said calmly. Ashcombe smiled faintly. Not enough to mistake a veil crest for servant jewelry. His gaze slid deliberately toward Serafina again. Interesting resemblance, too. The two younger noblemen behind him exchanged uneasy glances. Neither looked entirely comfortable being inside the room anymore. Nathaniel stepped closer to the doorway, subtly blocking the exit. "This conversation is inappropriate," he said quietly. No, Ashcombe's attention never left Lucien. What is inappropriate is discovering that one of the most powerful dukes in England has concealed a missing heiress inside his household for years. Lucien's voice lowered dangerously. "Careful." Ashcombe laughed softly under his breath. "There it is." He took one slow step farther into the study. The famous Ravenshade temper everyone pretends does not exist. Serafina watched Lucien carefully. Nothing outward changed in him. Yet somehow the entire room felt tighter now. Colder. Like standing too close to a cliff edge in winter. "You have mistaken gossip for truth," Lucien said. "Have I?" Ashcombe's eyes shifted again toward Serafina. "Then perhaps the girl would remove the pendant so we may inspect the crest properly." No, the word escaped Serafina before she could stop it. Ashcombe smiled immediately. "Interesting." Lucien did not look back at her. "You will leave now." "Or what?" Silence. Lucien took one step forward. Not hurried. Not dramatic. Yet both younger noblemen instinctively moved backward. "Or you will discover precisely why no one enters my east wing without permission." The quietness in his voice frightened even Serafina now. Ashcombe held his gaze several seconds longer before finally exhaling softly through his nose. "You always were protective of Vale property." The sentence landed strangely. Lucien's expression hardened further. "Leave." Ashcombe studied him carefully then. "You loved that family once." Silence crashed into the room so suddenly that Serafina felt it physically. Nathaniel's face tightened instantly. Lucien did not answer. Ashcombe's smile faded slightly. "Ah." Realization sharpened his eyes. "Now I understand." Serafina looked between them confused. "Understand what?" No one answered immediately. Ashcombe seemed almost fascinated now. "You never searched for the girl because of politics." His attention moved slowly toward Serafina again. "You searched because Ravenshade has been obsessed with House Vale since he was a boy." "Enough." Lucien's voice cut through the room like ice. Ashcombe lifted one hand mildly. "Relax. I am not insulting you." Another dangerous pause followed. Then Ashcombe's expression shifted subtly into something colder. More calculating. "But this changes matters considerably." Serafina felt fear move slowly beneath her ribs again. "What matters?" Ashcombe ignored her completely. "Does Parliament know?" he asked Lucien. "Or are you planning to unveil her yourself once inheritance courts reopen?" Lucien's eyes remained unreadable. "You assume too much." "No," Ashcombe smiled faintly again. "I assume exactly enough." He gestured casually toward Serafina. "That girl represents fortunes large enough to destabilize half the northern estates." Another flash struck her suddenly then. Men shouting around a long dining table. Documents torn open. Her father's voice furious. "They will come for her next." Serafina inhaled sharply. Lucien noticed immediately. "What did you remember?" Ashcombe turned toward her instantly. Too interested. "Ah. The memories are returning." Fear climbed higher now. Because Ashcombe sounded pleased by that. "Do not speak to her," Lucien said coldly. "You do not command this entire kingdom." No, Lucien's voice lowered further. "Only this house." Another silence followed. Snow hammered against the windows hard enough to shake the glass again. Somewhere below them, a grandfather clock struck midnight. Ashcombe finally straightened his cuffs calmly as though the confrontation bored him now. "Very well." He looked toward Serafina one last time. But if I were you, Miss Vale, I would start asking why Ravenshade kept you hidden instead of restoring your title immediately. The words struck harder than they should have. Seraphina looked instinctively toward Lucian. He remained expressionless. Ashcombe noticed that too. Good evening. Then he turned smoothly toward the door with the two younger noblemen following close behind him. Nathaniel remained blocking the corridor until the footsteps disappeared fully into the east wing beyond. Silence settled heavily afterward. Seraphina stared at the closed door several seconds before speaking quietly. Why did he say that? Lucian moved toward the fireplace without answering immediately. Because Ashcombe profits from confusion. That was not confusion. Her voice sharpened. He implied you hid me deliberately. Lucian rested one hand against the mantel. I did. The blunt honesty stunned her again. Why? He looked into the fire instead of at her. Because announcing your survival publicly before I understood who orchestrated your family's fall would have signed your death warrant. You keep saying that. Seraphina crossed toward him now despite herself. But no one has explained what actually happened. Lucian's jaw tightened faintly. Your father opposed a land consolidation bill in Parliament. That cannot be enough to erase an entire family. It was not only politics. His eyes finally lifted toward hers. House Vale controlled shipping routes carrying military contracts during the war years. Certain men became wealthy after your family disappeared. Seraphina's pulse slowed strangely now. Not calmer. Sharper. And if I reclaim the estate, those men lose everything. Another memory flickered suddenly. Her father lifting her onto a desk while laughing softly. Maps spread everywhere beneath candlelight. A silver ring bearing the Vale crest against his hand. Then shouting outside the study doors. Fear. Running footsteps. Seraphina closed her eyes hard. I remember him smiling. Lucian's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Alexander smiled often around you. You knew him well. Yes. Did you love my mother? The question escaped before she could stop it. Silence fell immediately. Lucian looked at her steadily while the fire shifted softly between them. Nathaniel quietly moved farther toward the windows pretending not to hear. Lucian finally answered. That is not a useful question tonight. It matters to me. Another pause. Longer now. Your mother was extraordinary. The carefulness of the answer told her more than confession would have. Something painful tightened unexpectedly beneath her ribs. Not jealousy. Something stranger. The realization that parts of Lucian's life connected to hers long before she understood either of them. And my father trusted you anyway. Lucian's expression darkened slightly. Alexander knew exactly who I was. The answer carried layers she did not fully understand. Before she could ask further, hurried footsteps approached outside again. Nathaniel opened the door immediately as Lady Agatha entered wrapped in dark green velvet with visible tension across her features. The guests are talking. She looked directly toward Lucian. Evelyn Ashbourne confirmed the crest publicly. Lucian went still. To whom? Everyone. Lady Agatha exhaled sharply. Half the ballroom believes the Vale heir has returned. Seraphina felt cold spread through her chest. Too fast. Everything was happening too fast now. Then tomorrow London will know, Nathaniel said quietly. No. Lucian crossed immediately toward the desk grabbing several sealed papers from beneath the ledger stack. No one leaves Ravenshade before dawn. The guests will not accept imprisonment, Lady Agatha warned. They will accept whatever I decide. The certainty in his voice silenced the room briefly. Lady Agatha studied him carefully then glanced toward Seraphina. And what about her? Lucian looked directly at Seraphina now. Something dangerous settled behind his eyes. Protective. Possessive. Controlled only by force. She stays in the East Wing tonight. Seraphina frowned instantly. Absolutely not. Lucian ignored the protest entirely. Nathaniel, double the corridor staff. Done. Agatha. No guest enters this wing without my permission. Lady Agatha nodded slowly. Lucian. His attention shifted toward her. If London discovers the girl before the inheritance courts reopen. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Lucian's gaze returned toward Seraphina. Then I will handle London. Something in the way he said it sent unease quietly through the room. Not arrogance. Certainty. As though he had already prepared himself years ago for exactly this moment. Serafina looked at him carefully now. Really looked at him. The exhaustion beneath the control. The way every decision tonight revolved around her safety before politics. The frightening intensity beneath his restraint whenever anyone else approached her. Then another memory surfaced suddenly and clearly enough to steal her breath. Young Lucien standing beside her childhood bed, while her mother whispered urgently in the hallway outside. The boy turning back toward little Serafina before leaving the room. "I'll come back for you." The memory vanished immediately afterward. But the promise remained. Serafina stared at Lucien in stunned silence because somehow, deep beneath 20 years of missing memories and hidden truths, one terrifying realization had finally begun taking shape. He had never broken that promise. The East Wing became silent after 2 in the morning. Not peaceful. Watched. Ravenshade Manor no longer felt like a noble estate wrapped in winter snow. It felt like a fortress preparing for siege. Additional guards stood at both staircases. Servants whispered in corridors before falling silent whenever Serafina passed. Somewhere below, trapped aristocrats continued drinking wine beside warm fires, pretending tonight had not shattered half the political balance of northern England. Serafina stood alone beside the tall bedroom window Lucien insisted she use for the night while snow drifted endlessly across the black gardens outside. The room itself was elegant without excess. Dark walnut furniture. Silver candle holders. Heavy velvet curtains. A fire burning low beside the sitting area. Nothing about it resembled a servant chamber. Which frightened her more than comforted her. Because everything tonight felt like movement toward a life she did not recognize. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Serafina turned immediately. "Come in." Lady Agatha entered carrying a folded shawl over one arm. Her severe aristocratic posture remained intact as always, yet exhaustion lined her face more openly now. "You should sleep." Serafina almost laughed. "I do not think sleep is possible anymore." Lady Agatha crossed quietly toward the fireplace before setting the shawl beside the chair. "No, probably not." Silence followed briefly. Snow scratched softly against the windows. Serafina studied the older woman carefully. "You knew who I was from the beginning too." Lady Agatha did not deny it. "Lucien recognized you first." "But you knew." "Yes." Serafina looked away toward the storm again. "Everyone knew except me." Something regretful flickered across Lady Agatha's face. "That was never cruelty." "Then what was it?" Another pause. "Fear." Serafina frowned faintly. "Of me. Of losing you again." The honesty in the answer unsettled her unexpectedly. Lady Agatha lowered herself slowly into the chair beside the fire. "When Lucien found you here 2 years ago, he nearly dismissed half the household because one footman spoke sharply to you." Serafina stared at her. "That does not sound like him." "No," a faint tired smile touched the older woman's mouth briefly. "It sounded very much like him at 19 though." The statement stirred something strangely warm and painful inside her chest. What was he like before? Lady Agatha looked toward the flames thoughtfully. "Too loyal." Another pause followed. "And very much in love with your family." Serafina's heartbeat slowed strangely. "My family. The Valles spent summers here when you were children." Lady Agatha's gaze lifted toward her quietly. "You followed Lucien everywhere." Another fragmented memory surfaced instantly. Herself much younger running through sunlit gardens while a teenage Lucien walked ahead pretending annoyance while slowing his pace so she could keep up. The image vanished almost immediately afterward. Serafina pressed one hand lightly against her chest. "I remember gardens." Lady Agatha watched her carefully. "You were 5 the last summer before the fire." Silence settled again. Then Serafina asked the question she had avoided for hours. "What really happened that night?" The older woman's expression changed immediately. The warmth disappeared. "Officially." "No." Lady Agatha looked into the fire for several long seconds before answering. "There was a meeting at the Vale estate 3 nights before the fire." "With who?" "Members of Parliament. Land investors. Military officials." Another pause. "Lucien attended with his father." Serafina felt cold spread slowly through her stomach. And your father discovered several noble houses had been manipulating wartime contracts through northern shipping routes. Lady Agatha's voice lowered. Enough money was involved to ruin powerful men if exposed publicly. Serafina remembered the shouting again. The maps. Documents slammed against desks. My father threatened them. Yes. And then the house burned. Lady Agatha did not answer immediately, which became answer enough. Serafina sat slowly beside the window because suddenly her knees no longer felt steady. They murdered my family. We never proved it. But you believe it? Yes. The word landed softly. Absolutely. Serafina stared into the firelight, unable to breathe normally for several seconds. Her parents were not victims of tragedy. They were removed. Erased. Why was I left alive? Lady Agatha's expression shifted again. Something darker this time. Because someone inside the house betrayed the attackers. Serafina looked up sharply. What? One servant escaped with you before the fire reached the nursery wing. Another flash struck instantly. A woman carrying her through smoke-filled hallways. Snow against her face outside. Running footsteps. Catherine, Serafina whispered. Lady Agatha nodded slowly. Her real name was Clara Bennett. She worked for your mother nearly 10 years. She saved me. Yes. Serafina swallowed hard against sudden emotion. She never told me any of this. Because Lucien paid her not to. Silence crashed into the room. What? Lady Agatha exhaled softly. Lucien found Clara 2 days after the fire. Serafina stared at her in disbelief. He found me. Briefly. Another dangerous pause followed. Then he lost you again. Serafina's pulse began pounding loudly now. Explain. Lady Agatha folded her hands slowly in her lap. Clara panicked after hearing rumors that surviving Vale relatives were being hunted. She fled south before Lucien could secure protection for either of you. Another memory surfaced sharply now. A younger Lucien standing in heavy snow arguing with Clara beside a carriage while she held little Serafina tightly wrapped in blankets. He tried to take me. Lady Agatha's eyes widened faintly. You remember that? Only pieces. Serafina's throat tightened painfully. He was angry. Terrified. Lady Agatha corrected quietly. Lucien searched nearly every village in England afterward. Silence returned heavier than before. The storm outside had softened slightly now. Snow drifted slower beyond the glass. Serafina looked down at the silver pendant resting against her blue gown. Why did Clara finally bring me here? She died. The bluntness of the answer stole the air from the room. Lady Agatha's voice gentled slightly afterward. Tuberculosis. Before she passed, she sent word to Ravenshade through a church contact. Another memory flickered faintly. A thin coughing woman pressing Serafina's face between trembling hands beside a tiny cottage fire. If anything happens to me, go north. Go to Ravenshade. Tears burned unexpectedly behind Serafina's eyes now. She looked away immediately before Lady Agatha could notice. She never told me the truth. Because she promised your mother she would protect you first. The words echoed painfully through the room. Protect you. Everyone had spent 20 years protecting her from truths large enough to destroy kingdoms. Another knock interrupted softly. This time Lucien entered without waiting. He had removed his formal coat sometime during the night. Only a white shirt remained beneath the dark vest now, sleeves rolled once at the forearms. Exhaustion shadowed his face openly for the first time. Yet the moment his eyes found Serafina near the fire, something in him eased almost imperceptibly. Lady Agatha noticed it immediately. So did Serafina. Any problems downstairs? Lady Agatha asked quietly. Lucien remained watching Serafina while answering. Ashcombe attempted another courier. And Nathaniel intercepted it. Serafina frowned. You are imprisoning people. Lucien finally looked toward her directly. I am preventing your execution. The harshness in the sentence silenced the room briefly. Lucien crossed toward the desk near the far wall and set several old leather folders across its surface. I think it is time you saw these. Serafina stood slowly. The folders looked ancient. Dust-lined. Bound with dark ribbon seals bearing the Vale crest. Fear tightened again inside her chest as she approached. What are they? Lucian untied the first ribbon carefully. Everything recovered after the fire. Inside rested letters, estate documents, burned photographs, and one small silver music box blackened slightly along one edge. The moment Serafina saw it, another memory exploded through her mind violently enough that she nearly lost balance. Music playing softly beside nursery windows. Her mother brushing her hair. Lucian sitting beside the fireplace reading while pretending not to listen to them. Serafina grabbed the desk, hard breathing unevenly now. Lucian moved immediately beside her. Easy. I remember this room. Her voice trembled. Not this room. Another one. She touched the music box carefully with shaking fingertips. My mother used to sing with this. Lucian remained very still beside her. Yes. Another memory followed instantly. Her father lifting the music box while laughing because little Serafina could never reach the top shelf herself, then shouting downstairs. Her mother's face turning pale. Lucian standing abruptly from the chair. No, Serafina pressed both hands against her temples now. There was someone else. The room blurred faintly around her. A man arguing with my father. Lucian's expression sharpened immediately. Who? I cannot see clearly. Her breathing turned faster. Dark coat. Silver ring. Another flash. A voice shouting the child must disappear too. Serafina gasped sharply. Ashcombe. Silence fell instantly. Lucian's face changed completely. Are you certain? I heard his voice. Fear moved violently through her chest now. He was there that night. Lucian looked toward Lady Agatha slowly. Something cold settled behind his eyes. Not surprise. Confirmation. I knew it, he said quietly. Serafina stared at him. You suspected him. For years. Then why was he invited here tonight? Lucian's attention returned toward her. Dangerous now. Controlled too tightly. Because sometimes, he said softly, the fastest way to expose a man is to let him believe he has already won. By dawn, Ravenshade Manor had stopped pretending to be civilized. The trapped guests still wore silk and diamonds. Servants still carried silver trays through polished corridors. Fire still burned in marble hearths beneath crystal chandeliers. Yet beneath the rituals of nobility, tension moved openly now, like cracks spreading beneath frozen lake ice. Serafina felt it everywhere. In the way conversations stopped when she entered rooms. In the way footmen avoided looking directly at her pendant. In the way Lord Ashcombe smiled too calmly during breakfast while watching Lucian from across the dining hall. Everyone understood something dangerous had surfaced during the storm. No one knew yet whether it would destroy fortunes or merely rearrange them. Lucian had not left the East Wing once before sunrise. Nathaniel moved continuously between locked studies and guarded corridors carrying documents beneath one arm, while servants delivered untouched coffee trays to rooms no guest had permission to enter. Around 7:30, Serafina found Lucian standing alone beside the eastern gallery windows overlooking the snow-covered grounds. Pale winter light sharpened the exhaustion beneath his eyes. He still wore yesterday's clothes. Only the black coat had disappeared. You did not sleep, she said quietly. Lucian glanced toward her reflection in the window glass before answering. Neither did you. Snow drifted softly beyond the frozen gardens below them. For several seconds neither spoke. The silence no longer felt entirely hostile between them, which frightened Serafina in ways she did not understand yet. Ashcombe knows too much, she finally said. Lucian's expression remained unreadable. Yes. Then why keep him here? Because if he leaves before I am ready, he controls the narrative in London. He looked back toward the white horizon outside. And men like Ashcombe survive by speaking first. Serafina studied him quietly. You already know he helped destroy my family. Lucian's jaw tightened faintly. I know he benefited from it. That is not the same thing. No, his voice lowered. Unfortunately, proving the difference matters. Another pause followed. Then Serafina asked softly, Did you ever hate me? Lucian turned fully toward her now. Genuine surprise crossed his face for the first time in hours. What? For surviving. The words sounded strange aloud. Smaller than the grief beneath them. Everyone else died. My parents. The servants. Your father, too. She swallowed carefully. Did part of you ever wish I had disappeared with the rest of them so you could stop searching? Silence filled the gallery. Lucien stared at her as though the question itself wounded him somehow. Then he crossed the space between them slowly. No, the answer came immediately. Absolutely. Never. Serafina looked away first because suddenly her chest hurt again in that unfamiliar way he caused too often now. Lucien's voice softened slightly. You were 5 years old. That does not change what happened. No, his eyes remained fixed steadily on her face. But it changes who deserves blame. Before she could answer, rapid footsteps echoed through the gallery corridor. Nathaniel appeared carrying several folded newspapers and a sealed letter. His expression already told Lucien the news was bad. The roads opened earlier than expected, he said quietly. A courier reached the village at sunrise. Lucien's face hardened instantly. How much spread? Nathaniel handed over the newspapers. Enough. Serafina watched Lucien unfold the first page slowly. Even from several feet away she recognized the headline immediately. Mysterious Vale survivor discovered at Ravenshade Estate. Her stomach tightened sharply. Lucien continued reading in silence while Nathaniel spoke. Ashcombe bribed someone downstairs before the gates closed. Of course he did. Lucien folded the paper once. Too calmly. That frightened Nathaniel visibly. There is more, Nathaniel added carefully. 3 members of Parliament are already traveling north. Serafina looked between them. Why? Nathaniel hesitated. Lucien answered instead. Because if your identity is legitimate, Parliament must reopen the Vale inheritance hearings. The words settled heavily into the room. Serafina stared at the snow outside, trying unsuccessfully to understand how a servant's life had disappeared in less than 24 hours. And if it is not legitimate? Lucien's gaze moved toward her slowly. Then someone will attempt to prove you are an imposter. A sudden memory surfaced violently enough to make her inhale sharply. A dark-haired woman whispering urgently while fastening tiny pearl buttons along little Serafina's sleeve. If anything happens, never tell them your name. They wanted me hidden forever, she whispered. Lucien noticed immediately. What did you remember? Someone telling me never to say my name. Her pulse turned uneven again. My real name. Nathaniel exchanged a quick glance with Lucien. That confirms Clara knew the danger reached beyond the fire itself, Nathaniel said quietly. Lucien nodded once. Then his attention shifted sharply toward the corridor behind them. Footsteps approached again. This time slower. More deliberate. Lady Agatha appeared carrying a silver tray with untouched tea beside several sealed envelopes. More visitors are arriving, she announced. Already? Nathaniel frowned. Who? Lawyers? Politicians? Her expression darkened. And Evelyn Ashbourne invited herself back upstairs. Serafina rubbed tiredly at her temple. Wonderful. Unexpectedly, Lady Agatha's mouth almost twitched with amusement. You sound remarkably like your mother. The comment struck strangely warm through the tension. Then Lady Agatha set the envelopes onto the side table beside Lucien. These came for the girl specifically. Serafina frowned faintly. For me. Apparently London moves quickly when fortunes are involved. Lucien opened the first envelope immediately. His expression darkened after reading only 2 lines. What is it? Serafina asked. Lucien handed her the paper silently. The handwriting looked elegant. Aristocratic. Lady Serafina Vale, in light of recent developments, several members of Parliament request your presence in London to confirm inheritance legitimacy under Crown authority. Serafina stared at the words without breathing properly. Lady Serafina Vale. Seeing the name written formally felt unreal. Lucien took the letter back carefully. No, Nathaniel looked toward him. Lucien. No, his voice remained calm. Final. She does not travel to London. Lady Agatha folded her arms. You cannot refuse Parliament indefinitely. Watch me. Serafina looked between them in disbelief. Stop deciding things for me. Lucien's eyes shifted toward her instantly. London is not safe. Neither is this manor apparently. Ravenshade is protected by armed guards and locked gates. Her voice sharpened. That is not safety. That is fear. Silence followed immediately. Lucian stepped closer slowly. Yes. The honesty stopped her cold again. I am afraid. She stared at him. He rarely admitted emotion at all. Hearing the words spoken aloud unsettled her more than shouting would have. Lucian's gaze remained fixed steadily on hers. You disappeared once already. His voice lowered almost painfully. I will not lose you again to men like Ashcombe. The gallery went completely still. Even Nathaniel looked away slightly at the rawness beneath the confession. Seraphina's heartbeat stumbled hard against her ribs. Before she could answer, another servant hurried into the corridor visibly nervous. Your Grace. He bowed quickly. Lord Ashcombe requests the assembly hall immediately. Lucian's expression hardened again at once. Why? He claims to possess evidence concerning the Vale inheritance. Silence crashed through the room. Nathaniel cursed softly under his breath. Lady Agatha looked toward Seraphina instantly. What kind of evidence? The servant swallowed nervously. A surviving witness from the fire. Every ounce of color disappeared from Seraphina's face. Because somewhere deep inside her fractured memory, one terrifying realization suddenly surfaced fully formed. There had been someone else in the nursery corridor that night. Watching. Listening. Waiting beside the flames while Clara carried her through the smoke. And for the first time in 20 years, Seraphina remembered the man's face clearly. Lord Ashcombe's younger brother. The same brother officially declared dead 3 months after the fire. No, she whispered. Lucian stepped toward her immediately. What is it? Seraphina looked up at him with genuine fear now. The witness is real. Silence. Then she whispered the rest. And he saw who started the fire. The assembly hall smelled faintly of smoke and wet wool by 8 o'clock that morning. Snowmelt darkened the marble entrance beneath rows of towering windows, while nearly every noble trapped at Ravenshade Manor gathered inside beneath the enormous crystal chandeliers. Conversations drifted low and uneasy across the room. No one pretended this was ordinary anymore. Servants lined the outer walls carrying untouched coffee trays while politicians, landowners and aristocrats whispered openly about House Vale, inheritance courts, and the mysterious girl who had appeared from nowhere wearing a dead family's crest. Seraphina stood near the rear entrance beside Lady Agatha, feeling every eye in the room turn subtly toward her whenever people thought she was not looking. Lucian remained several feet ahead near the center of the hall, speaking quietly with Nathaniel while snowlight spilled across his dark coat from the windows behind him. He looked exactly as he always did. Controlled. Untouchable. Yet Seraphina understood him differently now. Every calm order. Every locked gate. Every sleepless night. None of it had been about power. It had been fear. Fear of losing her again. The realization unsettled her more deeply than any political threat in the room. Do not let Ashcombe provoke you, Lady Agatha murmured quietly beside her. He wants emotional mistakes. Seraphina kept her eyes on Lucian across the hall. What does Lucian want? Lady Agatha's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You alive? Before Seraphina could answer, the massive assembly doors opened sharply. Lord Ashcombe entered first wearing dark charcoal wool, and the satisfied calm of a man who believed the morning already belonged to him. Behind him walked another man perhaps 40 years old with silver beginning at his temples and a noticeable scar crossing one side of his jawline. The moment Seraphina saw him, memory crashed through her violently. Smoke. Heat. Herself hidden behind nursery curtains while the man shouted downstairs beside Ashcombe. Clara pulling her backward through smoke-filled corridors while whispering desperately not to make a sound. Seraphina inhaled sharply. Lucian noticed immediately from across the room. That is him, she whispered. Lady Agatha stiffened. Are you certain? Yes. Her pulse pounded violently now. He was inside the house that night. The hall slowly quieted as Ashcombe guided the scarred man toward the center floor beneath the chandeliers. Lucian crossed forward immediately. Every aristocrat nearby instinctively moved aside for him without realizing it. You forced a public gathering over a 20-year-old rumor, Lucian said coldly. Ashcombe smiled faintly. Not rumor. Witness testimony. The scarred man looked visibly nervous beneath the attention now surrounding him. Seraphina noticed his hands trembling slightly. Lucian noticed too. Name. Edmund Mercer, the man answered quietly. Former stable hand for the Vale estate. A murmur moved through the room. Lucian's gaze remained sharp. You disappeared after the fire. Mercer swallowed. I was paid to. Silence settled heavily across the hall. Ashcombe folded his hands calmly behind his back. Mr. Mercer came forward voluntarily after recognizing the young lady upstairs last night. His eyes shifted deliberately toward Seraphina. Quite brave considering the circumstances. Lucian ignored the performance entirely. And what exactly is this witness claiming? Ashcombe's smile widened slightly. That the official story surrounding Housevale was incomplete. Mercer looked increasingly uncomfortable beneath the growing attention. I saw men enter the estate before the fire started, he said carefully. Several men. Seraphina's hands tightened together instinctively. Lucian's voice remained dangerously calm. Which men? Mercer hesitated. Too long. Ashcombe stepped slightly closer beside him. Tell the room what you told me. Mercer looked toward Seraphina unexpectedly then. Something almost apologetic moved across his face. I saw Lord Pembroke arguing with Alexander Vale that night. Murmurs spread instantly through the hall. Several nobles exchanged sharp glances. Lady Agatha stiffened beside Seraphina. Lucian did not react outwardly at all, which meant he was furious. Continue, he said quietly. Mercer swallowed hard. There were others too. Men from Parliament. Investors. Another pause. And Lord Ashcombe's brother. Silence fell instantly. Complete. Even Ashcombe's expression changed fractionally beside him. Nathaniel looked sharply toward Lucian. Seraphina felt cold spread through her chest. Mercer continued more shakily now. The argument turned violent after midnight. I heard shouting about shipping contracts and missing ledgers. Lucian's eyes narrowed slightly. Then what happened? Mercer looked down at the marble floor. The fire started in the west study. Another murmur spread across the room. Ashcombe finally stepped forward smoothly. As tragic as the situation became, it does not change the unfortunate truth that accidents occur during emotional confrontations. Lucian turned slowly toward him. Accidents? Ashcombe held his gaze calmly. Surely you are not suggesting anyone here deliberately harmed Housevale. Seraphina watched Lucian carefully then, because something terrifyingly cold settled behind his expression. Not anger anymore. Certainty. No, Lucian said softly. I am suggesting someone ensured the fire spread before servants could contain it. The hall went silent again. Ashcombe's smile faded slightly. Careful, Ravenshade. Why? Lucian's voice remained almost conversational. Does the subject make you uncomfortable? Ashcombe laughed softly. You have no proof. Actually. Nathaniel stepped forward carrying several aged documents beneath one arm. We do. Every eye in the room shifted instantly toward him. Nathaniel placed the papers carefully across the long assembly table near the center of the hall. Burned ledgers. Shipping records. Parliamentary contracts. Seraphina recognized the Vale crest stamped faintly across several pages. These were recovered from the East Archives last night, Nathaniel said quietly, alongside evidence confirming financial transfers to multiple northern estates within 2 months of the Vale fire. Ashcombe's face hardened almost imperceptibly. Lucian spoke without taking his eyes off him. Including yours. Silence crashed heavily through the room. Several politicians looked visibly alarmed now. Mercer stepped backward nervously. I never wanted trouble, he whispered. I only wanted payment. Ashcombe turned sharply toward him. Enough. The single word carried more threat than anything else he had said all morning. Seraphina suddenly understood something important. Mercer was frightened of Ashcombe. Still. Even after 20 years. Lucian noticed it too. Interesting, he said quietly. He fears you more than public disgrace. Ashcombe recovered almost instantly. This is absurd speculation built around a frightened servant and burned paperwork. His attention shifted deliberately toward Seraphina again, and conveniently timed around the sudden appearance of a girl claiming noble blood. The insult landed deliberately. Seraphina felt the room watching her immediately afterward. Measuring. Doubting. Lucien stepped forward before she could respond. She claims nothing. His voice lowered. Because her identity was never lost. Only hidden. Another silence followed. Then Lucien did something Serafina never expected. He reached inside his coat and removed a folded document sealed in dark blue wax. Lady Agatha inhaled sharply beside her. Nathaniel looked almost startled. Lucien, Lady Agatha warned quietly. He ignored her completely. This document was signed by Alexander Vale 3 hours before the fire. Lucien placed it onto the table slowly. It names the sole surviving heir to House Vale. Every aristocrat in the hall leaned forward instinctively. Ashcombe's expression finally changed openly now. Fear. Very small. Very real. Lucien's eyes shifted toward Serafina across the room. And it names her protector. The hall fell completely silent. Serafina could hear her own heartbeat. Lucien's gaze never left hers as he spoke the final words quietly enough that somehow everyone still heard them clearly. Me. No one in the assembly hall moved. The chandeliers above them glimmered softly against marble and gold while snowlight spread pale across the windows behind Lucien. Yet the entire room felt frozen around a single truth now. Protector. Not guardian appointed by Parliament. Not estate executor. Protector. The word carried something older. More personal. Serafina stared at Lucien, unable to breathe properly for several seconds. Memories moved through her mind like broken glass finally beginning to fit together. The carved silver horse. The promise beside her childhood bed. The years he spent searching. The way he looked at her whenever danger entered a room. He had never seen her as a servant. Not once. Ashcombe recovered first. Of course he did. Men like him survived by adapting faster than decent people could process betrayal. How touching, he said softly. A tragic promise between old families. His eyes darkened slightly. Unfortunately, sentiment is not legal proof. Nathaniel stepped forward immediately. The document bears Alexander Vale's seal and signature. Conveniently produced after 20 years hidden in Ravenshade archives. Ashcombe looked toward the surrounding nobles deliberately. Surely no one here believes this evidence appeared by coincidence. Murmurs spread uncertainly across the hall. Serafina felt fear rise sharply again. Not because Ashcombe sounded convincing. Because powerful men often preferred profitable lies over dangerous truths. Lucien remained completely calm. You are welcome to challenge the document before Parliament. I intend to. Ashcombe smiled faintly. Along with the girl's legitimacy. Serafina stiffened instinctively. Lucien's expression changed instantly. Cold enough to silence half the room without effort. Careful. Ashcombe laughed softly under his breath. There it is again. That protective streak. His gaze slid toward Serafina with calculated cruelty. Tell me, Miss Vale. Did Ravenshade ever explain why he kept you scrubbing floors instead of restoring your inheritance immediately? The hall went quiet again. Waiting. Watching. Serafina looked toward Lucien instinctively. He did not interrupt. Did not defend himself. He simply watched her steadily across the assembly floor like a man willing to survive any accusation she chose to believe. The realization struck unexpectedly hard. Because he trusted her answer more than his own reputation. Serafina stepped slowly forward into the center of the room before she fully understood the decision herself. Silk brushed softly across marble while nobles turned openly to watch her now. Not a servant anymore. Not invisible. She stopped beside the long assembly table and looked directly at Ashcombe. He kept me alive. Silence followed immediately. Ashcombe's smile faded slightly. Serafina continued before fear could stop her. While people connected to my family mysteriously died. Her voice remained steady somehow. While records disappeared. While witnesses hid for 20 years. Another step forward. While men who profited from my parents' deaths became wealthy enough to buy influence in Parliament. Ashcombe's expression hardened visibly now. Careful, girl. Serafina lifted her chin slowly. No, the single word echoed softly through the hall. I spent 20 years frightened of things I could not remember. Her fingers touched the pendant resting against her throat. I think I am finished being afraid. Something shifted visibly across the room then. Small. But undeniable. Several nobles exchanged quieter glances now. Not suspicion anymore. Recognition. Lucian watched her with an expression Serafina had never seen on him before. Not control. Not calculation. Pride. Real enough that it unsettled her heartbeat instantly. Ashcombe noticed too. You speak boldly for someone raised in servant quarters. The insult landed deliberately. Serafina met his gaze without flinching. And you speak carefully for someone whose brother stood inside my house before it burned. The room erupted instantly. Voices. Questions. Shocked whispers. Ashcombe's composure cracked fully for the first time. You have no proof. Neither did you, she answered quietly. Until this morning. Silence crashed down again afterward. Ashcombe looked toward Mercer sharply. The former stable hand immediately lowered his eyes. Fear spread visibly through him now. Lucian stepped beside Serafina then. Close enough that warmth brushed faintly against her shoulder. Not touching. Present. This assembly is concluded, he announced calmly. Any future disputes regarding Housevale will proceed through formal parliamentary review. You do not decide that alone, Ashcombe snapped. Lucian's grey eyes settled on him slowly. Actually, his voice lowered. As legal protector to the surviving Vale heir, I decide quite a lot. Another dangerous silence followed. Then something unexpected happened. Dowager Duchess Evelyn Ashbourne rose slowly from her seat near the rear of the hall. The elderly Duchess crossed toward Serafina carefully through the silent crowd while everyone watched. When she finally stopped before her, her pale eyes softened with unmistakable grief. You have your mother's courage after all. Serafina's throat tightened painfully. Evelyn reached into her sleeve slowly and removed a folded paper yellowed with age. Your mother wrote this the week before the fire. She held the letter toward Serafina with trembling fingers. She asked me to deliver it if you ever returned. Serafina accepted the paper carefully. Her hands shook slightly while unfolding the faded pages. The handwriting looked elegant, familiar in ways she could not explain. My darling girl, if you are reading this, then somehow you survived what we could not stop. I pray the world was kinder to you than it was to us. Trust Lucian. Even when you are angry with him, even when you do not understand him, he would burn kingdoms before allowing harm to reach you. Tears blurred Serafina's vision instantly. She lowered the letter slowly, unable to speak. The hall around her disappeared briefly beneath one devastating realization. Her mother had known exactly who Lucian was to her long before either of them understood it themselves. Serafina looked up instinctively toward him across the assembly floor. Lucian stood motionless beneath the winter light, watching her with that same impossible restraint he wore like armor every day of his life. Yet now she could finally see what lived beneath it. 20 years of loyalty, grief, waiting, searching, loving her quietly enough that he buried it beneath duty because protecting her mattered more than being loved in return. Ashcombe suddenly laughed once harshly from across the hall. Beautiful sentiment. His voice cut sharply through the silence again. Unfortunately, emotional letters do not restore fortunes. Lucian's attention shifted toward him instantly. Dangerous again. No, Serafina said softly before Lucian could speak. Everyone looked toward her. She folded her mother's letter carefully against her chest. But truth does. Ashcombe's expression darkened. You think sentiment wins political wars? Serafina met his gaze steadily. No, her voice remained calm now. Certain. I think people eventually destroy themselves trying to bury innocent families. Another silence followed. Then, slowly, Nathaniel placed the final ledger onto the assembly table and opened it toward the gathered nobles. The remaining Vale shipping accounts, he said quietly, including signatures approving the transfer of funds to Lord Ashcombe's estate 6 days after the fire. The room exploded into outrage. Questions erupted instantly from every direction. Politicians moved toward the table. Nobles demanded explanations. Ashcombe's face lost all remaining color while Mercer backed toward the doorway, visibly panicked. Through all the chaos, Lucian remained focused only on Serafina. She noticed it immediately. Even now, even with Parliament, inheritance, and scandal collapsing around him, his eyes searched her face first. As though nothing else in the room mattered more than whether she was still standing. The realization settled quietly into her chest. Permanent. Certain. Lucian crossed toward her once the shouting grew loud enough to conceal softer words. Are you all right? The question sounded almost absurd after everything that happened. Yet somehow it became the thing that finally broke the last wall inside her. Serafina laughed softly through tears she no longer bothered hiding. No, for the first time since she met him, Lucian smiled. Small. Tired. Real enough to steal the breath from her lungs completely. Good, he murmured quietly. That means you are finally behaving like a Vale. Another burst of outrage rose across the hall as politicians surrounded Ashcombe demanding explanations. Yet the noise no longer frightened her now. Because for the first time in 20 years, Serafina understood exactly who she was. Not a servant girl hiding from the world. Not a forgotten child surviving on borrowed names. She was Serafina Vale. Daughter of a family powerful enough that men tried to erase them from history. And standing beside her beneath the winter light was the one man who never allowed the world to forget she existed.